Martin, thank you, Peter. Please let me introduce our research, which deals with the provenance of radiolarites and reconstruction of upper Paleolithic mobility. This first stage is related to the Orient, mainly in Moravia, but we also realized that radiolarites are just one raw material out of many. So we reanalyzed three important signs as regards all raw materials. These are well-known ones: Nová Zdeňka, Tvarožná, and Milovice, and we tried to pinpoint the provenance of raw materials and also to distinguish between direct and indirect transport maybe. And in the next stage we will be dealing with the gravity and we will compare the results. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the outcrop of radiolarites. Just quickly, I will mention that there are about 6 or 7 main areas: the northern calcareous Alps, Vienna region, Gereča Mountains, western Slovakia, Pienin Mountains, and there are also radiolarites in Badenian gravels under Palavaj. Moreover, there are of course Bakony Mountains, but these were not sampled by us in this stage and will be presented in the later stage. These are like the Orient sites that we sampled or studied from literature, and these belong to middle or evolved Orient. We didn't deal with those sites which are on the left bank of Morava River because for some authors they are complicated as regards Orient classification. So you can ask afterwards, but I will not delve into this. These are the sites. That means, this is Tvarožná, Nová Zdeňka, and Milovice, and here are also some important outcrops of other raw materials which were also imported at the site. So, as regards the stratigraphy of radiolite outcrops, they are of course complicated, but they kind of repeat themselves because always radiolarites belong as regards the Jurassic to the late Jurassic period, because in the Tethyan region there was a deepening of the basin, and that's the environment where they originate. The same applies for Glasenbach Gorge at Salzburg, for the Vienna region, Gereča Mountains, and of course the Pienin Klippenbelt, which is supposed to be the main source of radiolarites at Moravian sites. So we deal mainly with the Oravicum, which is further subdivided, and this Charish and Pienin unit, they do comprise radiolarite strata in Chayakova and Sokolita formation. There are also radiolarites in the Petric and Petric area, but these are considered to be of lower quality, so we didn't sample those because they are not supposed to be used to much extent. It is kind of a geological problem. Why are there only Paleozoic and Mesozoic radiolarites? In the tertiary and quaternary there are no radiolarites. It is not exactly clear why. These are the outcrops in pictures, selected ones. So this is Elsbetten, Glasenbach, Klamet, Salzburg, Mušov, Krivoklát, Králov Vrchil, Šimek, which will be only shown in the next stage of the study, although we have it analyzed, but I am not showing it here. This is Javorky Čáková skala in Pienin Mountains in Poland. This is probably the best outcrop of radiolarites as regards quality and quantity, and Safari in Podhale Basin. Just a few examples. We used several methods to characterize the radiolarites. The first was color estimation. So first we used this Mansell scale, which is a list of colors. You can compare it to the radiolarites at the outcrops, for example, but the disadvantage is that you don't get any number that you can use statistically. So it's better to use spectrophotometry, which is an instrument which gives you 3 numbers, 3 components of the radiolarites, and this is then usable in multivariate statistics, for example. We use this portable X-ray fluorescence. This is not as sensitive as other methods, but it is fairly easy to use, and probably our main method is this laser ablation induced plasma spectroscopy, which is very robust, but then again complicated to use and expensive. And we did statistical analysis of everything. This is an example of how you can like present your mantle colors, color estimation. So we did it for every outcrop and artifact. This is like grayish-green color, and for example, you may observe here that in Western Slovakia, this color is present at Bolešov, Králové, Červenica, and Kyjov. These three outcrops. When you do this for all the outcrops, you get something like this. So these are the colors at the mantle scale, these are the regions that we sampled, and it's obvious that there is a huge variability in the colors. So it has been stated before that just based on the colors you cannot estimate the origin of the radiolarite, but when you've got the elemental fingerprinting, and you know, for example, that is from Western Slovakia, you are able to maybe pinpoint a concrete outcrop. So it's not altogether useless, this method, but this one is probably better because it's the result of spectrophotometry. When you take just two values, you can create biplot. The third value is so-called lightness. These are A and B components which run in this direction from green to red and from blue to yellow. So there is often a repeating pattern of an overturned B. These are like the reddish colors and brownish colors. These are the greenish colors. These are very typical for Central European radiolarite. But this is somewhat different, for example, in the Eastern Alps, when greenish radiolarites are almost absent. So in the statistical analysis, this may prove to be important. If you put it all together, it's a mess, of course, because there is a huge overlap of all the outcrops, but still some of the artifacts from our sites or assemblages are like outside of this like plot, so they seem to be maybe exotic or potentially not coming from the Western Slovakia, but this is just based on color. Probably more telling is this graph. By the way, we used methodology which was elaborated by Brandl and colleagues. We were inspired by his use of the elements which are most useful for the estimation of the provenance, and we also added these color variables. And what we got is, I have to say, we don't have the results from Nová Dědina, only from Milovice and Tvarožná. And as you may observe, these are all present in this left-hand corner, and they are actually outside of the scope of or variability of Northern Calcareous Alps, Sandspite, and Gereče Mountains. So these regions were not used at these sites. On the other hand, Pálava is relatively possible, but Western Slovakia is probably most likely because it covers like all these variabilities. So Western Slovakia is the most probable source, but we cannot exclude Poland either. There's a bunch of other raw materials that we estimated during our raw material estimation. I'm sure you know some of these, but I would mention just some of the most exotic ones we were greatly assisted by Professor Číslo from Brno in this endeavor. So there is probably, for example, obsidian of Hungary in Tvarožná. There are acid subvolcanites, which are like probably one of the two raw materials imported from the west. Otherwise, everything comes from the east or from other regions. And this is interesting because this is so-called metarylite from big mountains, which was amply used in the Silesian, possibly by the Neanderthals, but that remains to be a question. And okay, one more thing is this Lumachel. This was so far unknown. This is from the Hron River gravels. So this is also from the southeast. Should we generalize a bit? So all the imports or the imports predominate from this direction, from northeast direction. So the movement was predominant like this. This is mainly because of the erotic flint, which was like the predominant material here. But at some sites like Slatinky, even the Krakow Jurassic flint predominates, which is kind of strange. On the other hand, the imports from this direction is much rarer. So one way to interpret this is that this was like the residential movement, and this was kind of logistical forays, for example, for hunting or just to get the raw material, but it was much rarer in this direction. There are also these exotics like obsidian, both from Slovakia and Hungary, metarylite from big mountains, and exceptionally also these radiolarites in Buckley Mountains, but these are only known from aerial studies, not from us. And it is also interesting that there are practically no imports from this region. So there must have been some barrier represented by the Danube Valley, probably also by the Bohemian Moravian Highlands, and possibly also by like this Peonic Litany belt, because in here the raw material strategy or pattern is completely different. The same applies for Bohemia, although there are a few sites, of course. Well, this is from Andreas Mayer, similar pattern for the Magdalenian, but much fewer imports from the east. That seems logical because Magdalenian is a kind of Western phenomenon. And also we tried like to distinguish between the direct and indirect transport. So in Fulheim are the direct transport. Fabot Augustens also mentioned Seletian or visualized, so this is like a copy of Herme but improved. And the dashed line indicates indirect transport by social interaction and exchange. This is, of course, based on the fact that some materials are only present as final product, microblades or tools, but not by cores or debitage. So wherever you got a sufficient amount of cores, debitage, etc., that probably means direct transport, whereas final products like obsidian or metarhyolite probably mean just indirect transport, etc. Okay. So, okay, I forgot to mention that this method is only usable for distinguishing, for example, between limestones and radiolite, which is good because sometimes it's not obvious what is a silicified limestone, what is poorly silicified radiolite. So this was also useful, but this one is much more useful to distinguish single areas. Our current plan with the data that we have at our disposal is to form an online application where you can introduce your chemical data and you will be given some probability with which it belongs to this or that outcrop. It seems that we have like corroborated the long mentioned fact that radiolarites come from Western Slovakia at Moravian Origin sites. And okay, I forgot to mention that 100 kilometers seems to be like a threshold behind which the material never predominates. Not even the erratic flames. So this is like in concordance with what Haug mentioned about the Carpathian Basin, where this is like kind of similar. I mentioned these three geographical barriers, and I think that there are some similarities with the Seletian regarding the imports from the east and from the southeast. So the strategy or the pattern is somewhat similar. Maybe it's just like the similar use of the landscape. But there are also differences, for example, in the more intensified imports of erratic flames. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much for keeping the time and also for the presentation, because especially for me it looks very promising to obtain an analytical tool to distinguish this important raw material. Any questions or comments on this topic? Yes?
Have you also considered the so-called contemporary lab from Moravian radiolite as potential proposals for materials?
Which radiolite, sorry? Yeah, it's actually the one from the surroundings of Palava Hills. I forgot to mention that these are like secondary sources. These are all gravels. These are either Miocene, but maybe also quaternary gravels. And this is a good question because, for example, Professor Priestel mentions often that these are probably radiolarites from the Alps, but based on our estimation, these are kind of different from the Alps. So I'm not altogether sure about this, or maybe the outcrop has been destroyed and we just cannot sample it nowadays in the Alps, but it just doesn't answer to the Alpine region now.
When you do analyze of radiolite, do you take, for example, with single color and single structure, not mixed?
Sorry, I can barely hear you.
Okay, when you do analyze of radiolite, do you take a sample with single color and structure? What my question is, what if you have radiolite 3D
from red to green and to kind of dark green.
We mostly, when doing the analysis, we run a line across the artifact. So maybe there is like covering of both, for example, brown and green colors. But above all, we try to sample as much colors as possible from each outcrop. So we hope that we covered all the variability within outcrops, both like green ones, brown ones, black ones, and the others.
Thank you. And another question about obsidian. If obsidian transparent fresh, just about another question when it's more old, stagnated, and better. Is it possible to use this kind of?
Well, that's a question that I also would like to ask, because all the analysis that deal with obsidian, they do not mention like ablating something, they just measure it. So I would be also interested whether this can somehow influence the final interpretation, but I'm not a specialist in this, so in obsidian, so I'm not sure about this. We only did analyze radiolarite.
Typically, we have still 5 minutes if you have other questions.
Have you considered to correlate the weight, the proportions in weight of the different raw materials, different radiolarite, to the distance to each settlement? Do you understand what I mean? The weight, the proportion of weight of different raw materials in every site.
Yes, we did.
Correlation or not?
Actually, we did isolines, but it's poorly visible, so I didn't show it before. This is radiolarite, and well, this is about 10%. So radiolarite usually never predominates on Oregon and Moravian sites. There are just 2 exceptions. You have to believe me, I know you don't see it. So this is Sarojná site, there it forms about 82%, and there is one more site around here, which is Caroline Flum. These are the only 2. Otherwise, it's utterly secondary, I would say. But on the other hand, it is everywhere. Radiolarite artifacts are practically everywhere on the Oregon site, but they almost never predominate. My possible hypothesis is that this is because, as I said, these movements were like just logistical for it. For example, hunting, or just acquisition of raw materials. But this one was the principal one, the residential movement of whole groups. So that's why maybe this erratic flame predominates, and this is like secondary.
Okay.